It's been called the king of the swing states, Pennsylvania, one of 7 states that will likely decide the 2024 U.S. presidential race. And it's widely seen as a must-win for Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump to take the White House in November. Candidates need 270 electoral votes to clinch the presidency. Pennsylvania is worth 19, one of the biggest prizes in the country. But it's also one of the hardest to predict. Professor Joe Morris of Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania, unpacks the swing state where Trump and Harris are campaigning the most.
Pennsylvania was once described as being Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in the middle. And what we mean by that is that we have 2 major population centers and then a large number of smaller communities that dot this very large state. And I think that's one of the things that makes Pennsylvania such an interesting place.
Pennsylvania was long considered a reliably Democratic state, part of the so-called Blue Wall.
That changed in 2016. In 2016, Donald Trump punched a giant hole through the blue wall that included not only Pennsylvania, but also Michigan and Wisconsin.
Morris says Trump saw an opening in Pennsylvania to win over Democrats.
Pennsylvania is a state that tends to vote Democratic in presidential elections. But the state is largely socially conservative. We have a history of enacting some of the most conservative legislation, particularly with regard to abortion, that you would have found anywhere 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
In 2020, the state voted for a Democrat again, this time one of its own, Joe Biden, who grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Still, the Republican Party here has only grown in recent years.
There are by far more Republicans registered in Pennsylvania than I've seen in my lifetime. We are approaching, in Pennsylvania and in Erie County, parity between Democrats and Republicans, something that 10, 15 years ago would have been unheard of.
White working-class Pennsylvanians without college degrees account for roughly half of the state's eligible voters. Many of them are drawn to Trump. But high turnout in the urban areas, which are more diverse, could help Harris. Latino voters could also tip the scales. Nearly 580,000 will be eligible to cast a ballot this year, according to one estimate. In 2020, Biden won by just 81,000 votes.
Pennsylvania is a really interesting mix. We have, in terms of our racial composition, an interesting mix. In terms of our income levels, interesting mix. And the group this year that is probably going to play the deciding role is women. Women have been incredibly important in past elections, and when it comes to presidential elections, women not only are more likely to go to the polls and vote than men, but they vote at a higher percentage.
Pennsylvanians' top concern, like people in every other swing state, is the economy.
We have to remember that many of Pennsylvania's communities were devastated decades ago when manufacturing left, and today they're still looking.
For months, polls from Pennsylvania have shown Trump and Harris in a virtual tie. One place that pollsters are looking at for clues is Erie County.
Erie County is probably the swingiest swing county in the entire United States. We voted for the winner in 23 of the last 25 statewide elections. So if you want to understand what's happening in Pennsylvania politics, the place to come is Erie.
But it's hard to know exactly what's happening here. Signs for both candidates are everywhere, and Republican and Democratic operatives just across town from one another are battling to win over as many voters as possible before Election Day.